Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the B&H Virtual Event Space. Very happy to welcome in Alex Hinson. Alex, how's it going? What's up?
Good. How are you doing?
Doing really well. Hopefully we didn't scare Alex off. We had some fun in the green room. Listen to us in the background banter about all of our fun stories. But now we get to the fun part. Alex is going to let us in on some key secrets in how to master color. So super excited to find out more about that. Thanks to everybody who's joining us, whether you're joining on Facebook, Vimeo, Zoom. Thanks for being here. And if you have any questions that you want to get over to Alex, please feel free to do so. Obviously on Zoom, you can use the Q&A tab, or if you're joining us on Facebook or Vimeo, you can use the comment section. But otherwise, I'm going to get out of the way, say thanks again to Alex for being here. And the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Scott. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Today, I'm going to be showing you guys how to master color while you're shooting and while you're editing. And yeah, with that being said, pull this up here. So yeah, like I said, today I'm going to be showing you guys how to master color both while you're shooting and while you're editing. So before you can even think about mastering color while you're editing, you got to shoot correctly. That being said, I have 3 key points here. Number 1 is identify key elements in the scene that you want to capitalize on while editing. So when I say that, I mean finding a color in the scene that you want to capture, or like a subject. So that can be like a mountain or a tree or the sky, anything like that. And the next point I have is expose properly to ensure that you get the most color retention in the highlights and shadows. So what I mean by that is just kind of getting like a balanced exposure so you don't lose any information in the highlights or the shadows. So not too bright, not too dark, that kind of thing. And shooting raw so you get the most flexibility while you're editing. That kind of goes hand in hand with the last point. Just so you can really maximize your like potential while you're editing the image. Then move on to editing. First point is identify which colors you want to bring out and focus on. When I say that, I mean just kind of examine the scene and the photo that you want to edit and kind of just find the key points and elements, like I said, while you're shooting, to do that while you're editing, just so you can kind of maximize and bring out the color that you are looking for. And then next I have balanced exposure to bring color to the entire image. So when I say that, I kind of just mean not just like not have things too bright, not too dark, kind of just like a flat image, but that still pops, that kind of thing. And then use contrast between different colors to your advantage. So kind of just play the colors off of each other and just kind of complement each other. All right, so for this example image, I have this raw image here. As you guys can see, it is pretty underexposed. When I shoot, I usually do underexposed, but this one is kind of a drastic example of that. But I'm gonna show you guys that even when you do underexpose, you can still use the image and get the final image you're looking for. So when I identify that key element, I'm gonna be using the mountain there in the middle and the color scheme. I'm gonna try to exaggerate like the warmness in the sky. And then the top right, you can't really see it because I underexpose it so much, but there is some blue up there that I'm gonna try to bring out as well. All right, so for those of you guys that you don't know, I use Lightroom to edit all my photos. So first thing I do is just make some basic corrections. So that'll include the exposure, contrast, highlights, whites, shadows, and blacks. And when I do this, I kind of just balance the exposure so I can get a better idea of what I'm going to do on my next step, which is going to be the basic color correction. So this is going to be right under the basic correction tab of Lightroom. So that's just the saturation, vibrance, and white balance. And as you guys can see, this is the before, this is the after I do that. So I like to make my images pretty saturated and colorful. So that is what I do on this step. And next, we're going to have the tone curve. So the tone curve can really make your image pop and just kind of darken the darks a little bit, make the highlights pop a little more, just add a little more contrast in a more custom way than just using the contrast slider. And you can also use color curves as well. When you do use this, though, I do recommend using very, very slight adjustments, just because you can really change the look of the image very quickly while using these, but you can use them to your advantage if you use them correctly. And next we have the HSL sliders. So those of you guys that don't know what HSL means, that is the hue, saturation, and luminance. So the hue is basically the shade of the color. So for example, if you want to make your oranges more yellow or red, that would be the hue. The saturation is obviously like how saturated the color is. The luminance is going to be how bright a color is. So when you do these, you can do each color individually and kind of really just customize how each color looks and get it to your liking. And when you do this, it really begins your personal color grade as opposed to the like regular color corrections that everyone can use. So when you do this, you can really just kind of start getting your own look on the image. And next is split toning. This is another great way to kind of give your photo your own kind of look. So when you do split toning, you have 3 different selections. You have a highlight, which is obviously the brights, mid-tones, which is kind of in the middle, and then the shadows, which is going to be the darks. And when you do a split tone, you can also adjust the luminance. So that kind of adds a little more customization to your editing process and image as well. And then you can add a specific color to each, the highlight, mid-tone, and shadow. And as you guys can see, if I go back to this prior slide, and I go back to the split tone, you can see that I add a little blue tint to my highlights. I like doing that in my sunset photos just to kind of add a more balanced look instead of having the whole image be super, super warm. Kind of just gives it a little nice rounding to the color. And then next we're going to have filters. So filters are a key component to my editing process. I use a graduated filter on almost every single one of my photos. And for those of you guys who don't know what a graduated filter is, basically is a filter that can edit a specific part of the image. So for this specific image, I added a graduated filter to the top half of the image, just so I can really like customize the sky without editing the reflection on the water. So for this image, I added contrast just to make the sky pop more and the colors pop more. And then I kind of just played with the highlights and shadows. Something I like to do is up the shadows just to kind of make the mountain pop more. As you guys can see, as before, it's very, very subtle. Something that you're going to notice in my editing is I make a lot of minor adjustments that kind of add up. I do one big adjustment when I finish editing the image. And then once you add the graduated filter, you can go back through and do a final pass over. So basically what I mean by a final pass over is I just go through and adjust like the basic corrections. So this is the before with the filter, and then I go back and I see that it's a little darker than I would like it. So I go back through, make a final pass over, add a little more contrast, up the highlights, maybe adjust the graduated filter, just to kind of get a little more balanced look than what I had before. I also like playing with the saturation on the graduated filters, just to kind of make the sky pop more. But if you do use the saturation, I do recommend adding just a little bit, just because at least what I have found when I edit in Lightroom and I use a graduated filter on like a sky, for example, it can distort the colors a little bit and make them look a little weird. So that is another just a little minor adjustment. And then for the final pass over 2, you can see that is a decent difference. So for the final pass over 2, after I do the first final pass over, is go back through again and add any final adjustments that I like to do just to kind of polish off the image. So for example, that would be the saturation. So you guys look at the final pass over 1 and then go to the number 2. You can see that it is quite a big difference actually. So yeah, so I just go through and add contrast and up the highlights a little more and the saturations, kind of polish off the image. So if we go back and look at so that is the raw image. So as you guys can see, each step here is going to be very, very subtle adjustments, like I said. And they kind of just build on top of each other and really just add up into the final overall image. And I know I said earlier, if you go back to the shooting, number 2, expose properly to ensure you get the most color retention in the highlights and shadows. As you guys can see, I honestly expose this image pretty poorly. I do usually underexpose. It's crooked, it's underexposed, but that doesn't mean you can't use it. So I want to encourage you guys to work on your photos, even like if you don't think they look good raw or anything like that, they can be used still. And if you edit them properly and take your time, you can get a good final image. All right, and hope that kind of give you guys a little insight on how I edit and kind of how to bring color out in your images. All my social media is Alex Hinson with 2 X's. I do have prints and presets available on my Instagram, and my website is alexhinson.com. And we have plenty of time for questions, and I'm more than happy to answer all of them. So have any, let Scott know.
Awesome. Definitely. Yeah, guys, if you have any questions that you want to get into Alex, please feel free to do so. Now, I do know you mentioned kind of shooting out with filters and using filters kind of after
Hmm.
the fact as well. I mean, how do you go about utilizing filters in the field? Are you someone who always brings out a different array? Do you have, like, I know sometimes going out, depending on the time, ND filters, do you have just a kind of collection of gradients that you tend to sort of go out with, or do you kind of just figure, I'm going to try to stick with this, and then afterwards I can always fix that in post?
Yeah, so I used to never use any filters at all, and recently I did get an ND filter. There's a mist filter all in one, and I think that's perfect for me because when I do edit, I usually do kind of make it more of like a hazy look. So I do that kind of thing. But before that, I never used any filters, so I just kind of did everything in post. But definitely recommend trying filters if you haven't before.
Awesome. Now, one thing I did want to kind of also touch on, because I
Hmm.
know you talk about it a little bit, and I know it's not related necessarily to color, but I did notice it, and I know
Hmm.
it's something that we talk about all the time here on the event space. I did notice that you are kind of into NFTs, and maybe we can kind of dive into that a little bit. Uh,
Hmm.
maybe you can talk a little bit about why you've created the NFTs, and sort of what that helps out with as being an artist, and creating your art and offering your art to people, and why NFTs are so big. I know there's a lot of talk around it. I know there's a lot of people who are interested in them and kind of don't understand them. I mean, just for those people who aren't sure what an NFT is, it stands for non-fungible token. Am I correct, right, Alex?
Yes.
Got that right, right? Yeah. All right. So
Yeah.
okay, I got that. I don't know about anything else, but in the art realm, like, what's the benefit of that for somebody like yourself, who's an artist, who's creating, putting stuff out there for the world to see, versus just selling an actual print?
Yeah. So I'm not nearly as like successful as some people in the NFT space, but it's just like another way to have your work be like enjoyed by somebody. I kind of view it as like a one-of-one print, but it's digital. And I know not everybody is like, they don't think that it's like necessarily the same or like worth it, which I mean I totally understand, like to each their own. Um, but it's just a good way to, number one, support yourself like financially, just because as an artist, it can get rough out here sometimes. But yeah, and it's a good way just to connect with people that you wouldn't otherwise necessarily connect with. Just when people collect your art, it's good to talk to them, ask them why, what they like about it. And it's just good, kind of just get that insight. You know what I mean?
Awesome, awesome. And then just touching on the Lightroom thing, I mean, I know we were kind of talking about it before we went on the air, and we were kind of joking around. There's so many different options out there. We talked about Adobe Bridge, Camera Raw, those kind
Yeah.
of things. I mean, obviously, Photoshop is kind of like, in the world, people are always like, oh, Photoshop, Photoshop, Photoshop.
Mhm.
Uh, you use Lightroom. There's Capture One. There's so many different options out there, and there's so many different things available to people. Why did you choose to kind of stick with Lightroom overall, and not go with something like a Photoshop or a Capture One, or any of those other companies that are out there offering their editing softwares?
Yeah, so when I first started, I was just so for those guys you don't know, I've been shooting for 7 years now, about give or take. So I started when I was 16. So when I started, I just started editing pictures on my phone, obviously because I was 16 and Lightroom's kind of expensive. So, didn't necessarily have that kind of money spent on Lightroom. But once I did get Lightroom, it's kind of just one of those things that I've just always used. So why switch? And it's like my workflow is super fast and like straight to the point now. Like I know what I'm gonna do in Lightroom before I necessarily even like open it to edit a picture. So it kind of just, yeah. Um Basically I just always use it. So why switch? You know what I
Definitely, definitely.
mean?
If it's not broke, don't fix it, right?
Yeah, it's exactly.
Awesome. And then, for anybody who's kind of getting started, and maybe struggles a little bit. I know that there's always a struggle for somebody creating. We go through kind of these peaks and valleys of
Mhm.
times where one day you're super inspired to go out and shoot and create and capture, and then the next day you're kind of like, I could just kind of sleep in bed an extra 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Or maybe hang out a little bit longer. For those people who kind of, either they're that beginner just getting into sort of the landscape realm, or for people who are kind of finding that they've fell into that little bit of a lull, what kind of advice could you offer to people to kind of keep creating? I mean, I know you said that you've been doing this for over 7 years now. you know
Mhm.
what do you look to be able to sort of stay inspired?
Yeah. So first off, if so, I say that happens like everybody. So if you ever find yourself in like that mind state, don't feel like you're less than whoever you look up to or are inspired by. But I just go somewhere that like I know will make me inspired. So for me personally, that's the coast. Like even if I go over there and don't necessarily shoot very much or create that much, just going over there and being in like that area kind of just puts me in like the right headspace. Also, if you don't have, I recommend if you are like a creative and like that's like your like main passion, I do recommend finding something else besides your like main passion that you like doing or that kind of thing, just to kind of not necessarily get your mind off of creative things, but just kind of do something else for a minute. You know what I mean? Because like regardless of what it is, if you keep doing the same thing over and over and over and over again, like you're gonna get burnt out eventually. So
Awesome. Well, Alex, I want to say thank you so much for sharing with us some of your tips on creating and mastering color. For everybody out there, I want to say thank you for joining us. Take a look at Alex's social. He's got some great images on there, really beautiful, especially if you're looking just to kind of get inspired. He's got some great stuff out there. It looks like, oh, here we go. We did get another question in here from Myra, which I don't know if it's Facebook or Vimeo, but thanks for joining us. Either way, wanted to know. I can't decide if I'm going in the right direction or if I like my edits. Any thoughts on that?
yes, honestly, as long as you are continuing to do it, first of all, you're heading in the right direction, and don't be afraid to like try new things. Like I can't even tell you the amount of times I've like not liked how I've edited something and then tried something completely different that I wouldn't have done normally, and then I end up liking it, and then I can just incorporate it into that like my regular workflow afterwards. So don't put yourself in a box, basically.
So do you ever kind of come back to your images and sort of relook at them and go, you know, hey, at this point, maybe an image you took when you were first starting out, you
Hmm.
edited it a certain way, you loved the photo. I mean, I know we've all been there where you start out, you take a photo and you're like, I love this photo. This is the
Hmm.
best photo I've ever taken. and
Yeah.
and then come back, several years later and you go, wow, this is a really bad photo. This is just terrible. And then maybe go and try to fix it, try to, re-edit it, bring some life back to it. I mean, do you ever kind of do that, or is that something you just try to avoid and just keep progressing and going through?
No, I do that a lot actually. I go through my old photos quite a bit. Not necessarily to. There's a few that I won't go back and retouch just because they're from like a certain like time in my process, and it's just one of those photos. But the majority of the photos I do go back and retouch or try to edit again, and even like photos that I shoot like recently, like sometimes I got to edit 3, 4, 5 times before I'm satisfied with the final product. So, and I also recommend while you're editing, it's good to take a break and go do something else for even if it's just like 10 minutes and then come back with like a fresh set of eyes, just because you might be able to see something you didn't see before while you're editing.
Awesome. Awesome. Great tips. Well, that's all the time we have for you tonight. We really appreciate it. Alex, thanks for being here. Thanks everybody for tuning in. This has been another edition of the B&H Virtual Event Space in the books. We'll catch you next time.